This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. We've got some fresh stuff for y'all tonight, including a look at some urgent needs for tribal communities. Plus, Facebook responds to calls for change on how it handles hate speech. I'm no Walter Cronkite, clearly, but I can tell you how the cookie crumbles. Here's how it's breaking down tonight. The US has reported more than 3 million cases of coronavirus. One small piece of good news in that total number includes nearly 1 million people who say they've recovered. But cases are still surging in several states, and in many cases, resources are spread thin, including in Arizona, which is now the hardest hit state in the country. According to Johns Hopkins University, 1 in 4 people are testing positive there.
We have a huge testing shortage. People have been in line for 8 hours in a hot car while they ache, waiting for a test. We are looking to highs this weekend of 117 degrees. We are 5 months in the United States of America. People who want a test should not have to wait that long.
The White House Coronavirus Task Force held a press conference today amid the surge in hospitalizations. Dr. Deborah Birx says states with surges should return to Phase 1 guidelines. And in the middle of this global pandemic, the U.S. is withdrawing from the World Health Organization. The request will officially take effect July 6th of next year if President Trump gets his way. Meanwhile, Joe Biden says he will reverse the decision if he's elected president. Other countries are also weighing in on the move. That includes Germany, whose health minister called the move a setback for international cooperation. Another decision from the Supreme Court today, and it's a game changer for many women. The ruling gives more room for employers to refuse providing free birth control to workers using their health insurance. It clears the way for expanded exemptions on employers who have religious or moral exemptions. That includes publicly traded companies and large universities. The government estimates up to 126,000 women could lose free contraceptive coverage under this decision. Even if you're not a big soccer fan, starting today, you have a sport to cheer for. Major League Soccer has officially returned. Orlando City will take on Inter Miami CF. The game marks the kickoff to a tournament at the ESPN Wide World of Sports Complex near Orlando, Florida.
There isn't a playbook for this, and I think even as the tournament continues, it's always going to be about that. Players feeling safe, being able to be in the best environment possible to be healthy, to compete.
Of course, no fans will be present, but there are still plenty of concerns. The virus has already taken one team, FC Dallas, out of the tournament altogether. The team withdrew earlier this week after 11 members tested positive for the coronavirus. Coronavirus has been bad for everybody, but it's been particularly hard for some communities, including those on tribal lands, where the pandemic is exposing a lot of other problems that have been brewing for a long time now. Newsy's Meg Hilling has a deeper look at the impact of COVID on tribal communities and the resources they need to fight back.
In the Navajo Nation and Native American communities across America, COVID-19 is hitting hard.
The Navajo Nation is going through some tough times right now.
According to the latest numbers from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, non-Hispanic American Indian or Alaskan Native people have an age-adjusted COVID-19 hospitalization rate that is 5.7 times that of non-Hispanic white people. On Wednesday, Native American communities called on Congress to address long-standing infrastructure problems on tribal lands that have hurt their ability to fight the growing epidemic. In a remote hearing with the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, tribal leaders cited a need for assistance in filling voids in broadband infrastructure, healthcare systems, and sanitation.
These disparities have led to our vulnerability and the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 to our communities, both in terms of our infection rates and rate of death.
The problems are especially acute for the Navajo Nation. Since confirming its first case of the virus in March, the Navajo Nation has documented some of the highest rates of infection in the U.S., with roughly 8,000 confirmed cases as of July 7th.
As a result of the chronic underfunding of Indian programs, which was mentioned earlier, tribes were not equipped with prompt and adequate resources to respond to COVID-19.
Nez is now calling on Congress for urgent help with the broadband and electricity problems and for help cutting through bureaucratic delays.
Red tape is as much to blame as funding. It takes anywhere from 1 to 2 years to get the necessary approvals for infrastructure.
The Democratic coronavirus relief bill, known as the HEROES Act, would provide $20 billion to tribal nations to help deal with the epidemic. but the bill, which passed the House in May, is now stalled. For Newsy, I'm Mag Hilling.
When we're back, we'll take a look at what Kanye West hopes for his presidential run with the gravitas it deserves.
We take a step away from the noise and spin to really hear the stories that need to be told. Newsy cuts through.
There's 3 American girls competing for the top 2 Olympic spots.
I could go into this and come out with nothing.
Sure. Memes and cat videos are fun, but actual news might be a bit more useful. Follow Newsy on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get straightforward, opinion-free news right on your social news feed.
Here's a quick peek behind the curtain. Some trending topics could easily be things we cover at the very beginning of the show. Others are car wrecks we really couldn't turn away from. Here's what's trending. Turns out the brand fit for US presidents might not be the look for the work from home while not wearing pants era. Brooks Brothers is trending after announcing they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, joining other retailers like J. Crew, Neiman Marcus, and JCPenney as businesses that have been disrupted by the coronavirus. The 202-year-old brand has already decided to close 51 stores. We'll try not to give this more time than it deserves. Kanye West is trending after laying out his questionably 2020 vision for a West presidency in a wide-ranging interview. Here are the highlights. He no longer supports Trump, wants to run under the birthday party. He says he's a COVID-19 survivor, and maybe the piece that's sure to split the black vote come November, he wants the White House to resemble Wakanda, the fictional African nation from Black Panther.
Is this your king? Huh? Is this your king?
It's worth noting Kanye is too late to even make the ballot in 6 states, and he's yet to file a lot of the necessary paperwork, so we'll see how serious he is about this, but we are talking about it, so you got us, Kanye. It might not be the spelling we're accustomed to, but the Karen Act, C-A-R-E-N, is trending after a government official in San Francisco introduced the bill. The very tongue-in-cheek Caution Against Racially Exploitative Non-Emergencies Act is an ordinance that could levy criminal charges against people who, well, it's in the name, folks. If you've missed the conversation, Karen refers to white women who've been seen calling the police on black people for doing very chill things like cooking out or bird watching. One of the biggest developments that came out of the 2014 killing of Laquan McDonald, a black teenager, was how Chicago police officers essentially covered for each other. Almost 5 years later, the Chicago Police Board voted to fire 4 officers for falsifying reports and giving accounts that didn't match up with video of the killing. In this next story, Newsy's Casey Mendoza talks to a former cop, a black man who infiltrated the KKK, who says this unwritten code of silence needs to be addressed to make real changes in American policing.
Law enforcement departments around the country are grappling with the growing demands for police reform.
We tend to resent being judged by outsiders. Thus, if we know of somebody committing a wrong, we tend to stand by that officer simply because he's one of us.
Policing has always had cultures, and it always is an individualized culture of its own, separate from society.
To learn more, Newsy spoke to 2 former police officers, Professor David Thomas, psychologist and criminologist at Florida Gulf Coast University, and Ron Stallworth, author and the real-life Black Klansman, who infiltrated the KKK in the late 70s.
We tend to erect this blue wall of silence. We erect a barrier, a shield, to protect our own. It's nothing new. It's been going on long before I even became a cop in the 70s.
The Blue Wall of Silence refers to the long-standing and informal code in law enforcement that punishes whistleblowers and discourages officers from reporting police misconduct and corruption.
Well, I've seen the retaliation happen. I've seen people transfer. I've seen officers quit and go to another agency because they just refuse to be a party to it.
Law enforcement researchers, activists, and politicians have recognized the issue for years, recommending external reviews and internal incentives to combat the code of silence. Among the general public, a recent AP poll on police reform found that more than 80% of respondents support requiring police to report misconduct by their peers.
That is a very difficult position to be in because this position, policing, is about trust.
Both Thomas and Stallworth support the calls for more internal accountability, but also recognize the difficulty to change the culture.
You have to encourage officers to step forward. They can't be allowed to fear backlash from their peers because they choose to do the right thing while others choose to remain silent.
Casey Mendoza, Newsy, Chicago.
All of my real, true friends are on Twitter. If you want to join the squad or just infiltrate so you can throw shade, get at me here.
We're working hard to get you the news you need.
We dig a little deeper on the stories of the day.
That's why we're here.
To help start making sense of it all.
Newsy cuts through.
More than 750 companies have paused advertisements on Facebook and Instagram because, in their eyes, the social media company isn't doing enough to curb hate speech on its platform. To address that, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and other executives met with leaders from civil rights groups to discuss changes they'd like to see. Newsy's Tyler Atkinson has more.
Mark Zuckerberg met with the civil rights groups behind a Facebook ad boycott over how the company handles hate speech and other race-related issues. The Stop Hate for Profit campaign brought 10 recommendations to Zuckerberg to provide clear steps that Facebook could take immediately to increase platform accountability and decency. They include adding a C-suite executive with civil rights expertise to review policies for bias and hate, removing groups focused around white supremacy, and eliminating the exemption that allows politicians to lie in ads without punishment. In a Facebook post before the meeting, COO Sheryl Sandberg said the platform is already addressing some of these concerns and will release a 2-year review of our policies from an independent civil rights audit on Wednesday. She added that Facebook won't be making every change called for in the audit, but will put more of their proposals into practice soon. Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, told CNBC that Sandberg's post didn't sit well with him or other members of Stop Hate for Profit.
If this were a good faith effort to release the audit, they wouldn't be shoehorning it in, accelerating its release, timed with our meeting today. If this were a good faith effort, they would have already given us a set of recommendations of how they're responding to our recommendations, rather than spinning with a Facebook post hours before the meeting.
Sandberg also wrote that Facebook is spending billions of dollars on teams and tech to remove hate, including on artificial intelligence that can remove hateful content at scale. In a recent CNN interview, Facebook VP of Global Affairs and Communications Nick Clegg elaborated on how that system has worked so far.
We remove about 3 million items of hate speech content per month around the world. 90% of that, by the way, we get to that before anyone reports it to us.
However, experts say this is the norm for most big social media platforms.
Artificial intelligence is very widely used, and a very significant proportion of the material that is ultimately taken down is initially identified by artificial intelligence-driven technologies.
And even if Facebook software flagged 90% of hate speech, that figure doesn't account for accuracy.
One should not assume that just because the AI technology is able fairly effectively to flag things, that it is also effective enough to actually follow through and just take it all down.
Barrett also said that even if Facebook can flag 90% of 3 million hate speech items each month, it implies the software misses 10%, or roughly 300,000 posts. Tyler Atkinson, Newsy, Chicago.
By now, you've probably heard about the possibility of TikTok getting banned. But we wanted to know where the concern was coming from. Sasha Ingber looked into the claims.
The Trump administration is weighing whether to ban the popular Chinese social media app TikTok.
I don't want to get out in front of the president, but it's something we're looking at.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the private information of American users could be turned over to China's communist government. Experts say TikTok poses a threat, but to what extent is unclear.
I absolutely am concerned about these security risks. And I think it's important to remember that TikTok isn't just any Chinese social media app. It's one of the fastest growing in the world and extraordinarily popular in the United States.
You still have to always ask, under what situations would companies turn over data to the Chinese government? I don't think it's the case that, for example, all of TikTok's data is flowing back to China.
The potential ban comes as tensions between Washington and Beijing persist, with President Donald Trump faulting China for the coronavirus pandemic. On the app, users share short video, and recently some users said they pranked a presidential rally by registering to attend and not showing up.
Oh no, I signed up for a Trump rally and I can't go. I'm sick.
I would not jump to a rationale that this is just a political motive, because I think there are real underlying concerns here. But of course, in an election year, one can never ignore the politics of the moment.
TikTok denies having ties to the Chinese government, telling Newsy it's led by an American CEO and has, quote, never provided user data to the Chinese government, nor would we do so if asked. The company also announced it's pulling out of Hong Kong stores after Beijing imposed a new national security law that would require tech firms to comply with Chinese government requests for data.
I don't think it's prudent just to take those claims at face value, especially when we've seen concerning evidence so far. For example, last fall, during the height of the Hong Kong protests, there were reports that TikTok was preferentially censoring content related to the protests that was deemed unfavorable to the Chinese Communist Party.
TikTok recently lost a giant market after India banned the app. But it's yet to be seen what the U.S. will do after the government began investigating TikTok and parent company ByteDance last year.
U.S. government users are not supposed to use apps like TikTok. So I think we're in a little bit of uncharted waters here in terms of how this goes forward. But I would expect to see the U.S. government itself, which is one thing, ban the use of these apps more formally.
Sasha Ingber, Newsy, Washington.
Next up, board games are good for more than just infuriating your family members. You'll see what we mean.
We take a step away from the noise and spin to really hear the stories that need to be told. Newsy cuts through.
We dig a little deeper on the stories of the day to help start making sense of it all.
So we all know college tuition is wild expensive. And despite the fact that education is, for the most part, going online this fall, the cost of attending most colleges isn't budging, or not by much. This sky-high cost of higher education has built up the largest type of debt in the nation, that's student loan debt, which is now a $1.5 trillion crisis. To better understand how that's happened and the impact it has on younger Americans, Newsy's Zach Toombs took a pretty creative approach.
45 million Americans have student loan debt, about $37,000 worth on average. Now, there are a lot of ideas about how to change that, but to understand the possible fixes, you've got to understand the problems and how they play out in the game of life. See, a few decades ago, college costs were low enough that Boomer here could work just over 1,000 hours at a minimum wage job and pay for all 4 years of tuition at a public college. So Boomer graduates and carries on down the American dream road. Maybe he gets married, buys a house, and continues to accumulate wealth. But over the last few decades, the costs of college and a lot of other costs have gone way up, while the spending power of minimum wage jobs hasn't all that much. So Boomer Jr. would have to work more than 4 times as many hours at a minimum wage job as his parents did to pay for 4 years of tuition. That's a lot of work to fit into summers and weekends throughout school. So a lot of people aren't paying for college up front. As costs have grown beyond what students can handle, a lot of people are taking out loans to pay for it. And as Boomer Jr. goes through post-college life, They'll end up putting more money toward repaying those loans and have a lot less money left over for other things, which means some things get put off or don't happen at all, like buying a house or getting married, which means it takes a lot longer for Boomer Jr. to get into the game of life. In fact, it's like Boomer and Boomer Jr. were playing entirely different games.
The pandemic pushed back the big day for many couples. Now we're nearing the rescheduled date for many, but the caseload is still climbing. So is it safe to go to a wedding right now? Lindsay Thies breaks down the risk.
When it comes to getting sick with COVID-19, you might be thinking about this, and we have too. Anne asked,
what's the risk of attending a wedding reception with about 50 people?
We asked the experts. Their take, the risk of contracting COVID-19 from going to a wedding reception is medium.
It really depends on what phase your state is in. So if you're on the upswing of the number of cases of the pandemic, probably not a great time to go to a wedding reception. Around the peak, probably not as well. I probably want to make sure that we're past that peak and we're clearly on the way down.
It's still very important to know that if you're going to the reception, that you still want to minimize the number of people at that, minimize your contact with individuals. I know that's pretty hard at a wedding. Make sure that maybe that it's not a buffet wedding, all right? Individual plates so that you don't have people all showing up at the same spot, working with the same food. That's probably a good thing. Outdoor venues, always a big fan of outdoor venues right now, especially during the warm months.
It would definitely be more risky inside. Outside, you have fresh air. And then whatever requirements that you have in the city or state where you are, if it's even allowed. But within that, as long as, again, you are maintaining social distancing, wearing a mask to protect yourself.
If you have a question about your risk, email us a video question to what'stherisk@newsy.com.
That's it for In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. I'm going to go learn how to do TikTok before it's blacklisted, but in the meantime, here are more top stories from Newsy.